Hey, Asha, thank you for coming in. You have just a tremendous career of accomplishment from your educational background to your starting companies to having global impact with women in data science programs to, speaking and these bestsellers you're writing on making sure that people can use AI properly. So just really an outstanding, amazing sort of contribution across so many different ways. So thank you for coming in and sharing your insights with my audience.
Thank you for having me. I'm really honored.
So Asha, I actually look at who looks at my posts on LinkedIn or when I do interviews and things like that. And actually the five top positions are actually business leaders, either founders or co-founders, CEOs, board members, presidents. And then right after that are professors and engineers and so on. So there's kind of a very high level aspect of the people who are in my audience, but all of them have typically a tech background. So I know. So just to give you a kind of a lens on that. Now, Asha, as I mentioned, you have this marvelous background. There's got to be some magic moments in your life, like inflection points that really created this person that you are today. And it could have been when you were like 5 years old or 10 and inside, outside the family. It could have been in school. It could have been other sort of mentors in your life or career milestones. But maybe if you could pick two or three of the top ones that you think really shaped you.
I a lot of time people ask me this question. What made you this confident or ambitious, or who you are? And I have to say that I've thought about it quite a bit, and I keep going back to, as you said, I still remember. I think probably 5, 6, 7, around that age. And my mom has been a huge influence in my life. And, I think a lot of people have parents who impact them in some way. My mom was a very ambitious, very driven woman, a self-made entrepreneur, and a small business, but she was very ambitious and wanted big things for me. And I still remember, I grew up in Delhi, India, and I still remember during those days we would have this public buses. I don't know if they still exist, but during those days we had public buses, and my mom wanted me to be first on the bus. Like there was, people would run up to get the seat, and I never understood why she wanted me to be first everywhere, even on the bus. And at that time, of course, my mom was annoying. But when I look back, what I realized that somewhere that ambition my mom had for me to be the best at everything rubbed off. And I think I aim to or aspire to do the best I can wherever I go. And I think that's where the ambition, the drive came. And I think it's still there. It just made me who I am. And I'll share one more story. I think it's about the compassion, um, being and I wondered why and where it came from. But, I still remember being really little. And, I would really get impacted. In India, you would have, we still in New York have homeless people, but in India, you would see these really poor people on the street. And I remember coming home and being really upset, to see these poor people who didn't have food. So I remember being compassionate, as a child. And I think that still lingers on, where it's hard for me to see pain in the world. And I think those are the two um, attributes, traits which I carried as a child. And I don't know if it's inborn or you're born with these traits, but I still remember having them as a child very distinctively.
So that's really interesting. I'm going to reflect on what you're saying. And you're saying that perhaps there could be some kind of genetic element, the nature part that sort of positioned you into this compassion and empathy for others, but also this striving to be the best, to do the best, to work hard. And then you had the nurture part where you're saying your mother was an entrepreneur, and I think that's really a fascinating story to, say you got to be first on that bus. And that mentality then is driving you to strive and to strive and to strive to be your best, right? And working hard to be your best. And then, as you mentioned, seeing people who are hungry and realizing, that's a wrong, I want to do something to correct it, right? So I can see this now, how that shaped the things you're doing, like, for example, women's leader in data and AI, because that's about empowerment. And I can see, you got your Bachelor of Computer Science at Bangalore University in India, and India has a very competitive educational program. So, and computer science is one of the toughest fields to get into. And then you got a master's of data science from Southern Methodist University. So, and then additional training at MIT and the London Business School. All of these things are really, again, evidence of this kind of striving. So that's fascinating. Okay, so now let's kind of go through sort of a chronological, some of your career things. So you're in school, your mother said, you got to be first on the bus, and that probably translates into you got to, study science and mathematics and things like that. Did you have an interest in the arts as well? Did it go into other areas?
It's really funny you say that because throughout my middle school and high school, I remember getting like 100 on 100 in math and really enjoying physics and biology. But when it came to languages and art subjects, I struggled. And I used to feel bad because I really wanted to be good at, the languages and history and geography. But I don't know why math came easy to me. Zeros and ones made sense to me. And even today, like, people will ask me, what kind of music you like. And I try to give the correct answer, but I'm not musically inclined, so I am more, if you give me a math problem, I love doing math problems, but I'm not really great at, any kind of art. And I would want to be all rounder. I would want to learn everything and be good at everything, but math comes easy. And I remember I would be like, oh, thank God in high school I took all the science classes because I knew I wouldn't have to struggle. But in middle school, when I was doing all the different subjects, I was struggling in art subject. So I thank God I'm doing computer science because, doing stat and data science is much easier for me. My brain gets it better. But, if I enjoy live music, but generally my education about music is not that great. I'm not very inclined on music and art. But I have to tell you that when you were talking about middle school and high school, that what was popping in my head was I never said no to anything. And I had, I did try learning instruments, because I figured that maybe I can't be a singer, but my music inclination would get better if I, learn instruments. And in high school, we had a band, and they needed a vocalist. And I said, listen, I'll try, but I can't sing to save my life. And they realized pretty quickly that I was a horrible singer. So they said, why don't you we are short of, the band in the band. Why don't you stand in the back and play the guitar, the little guitar, just help us out. And I said, yes. So I never said no to extracurricular activities. I was always the debate champ I would participate in debate championship, and I would always be top 3. So what I realized that the desire to say yes and learn and jump into things helped me in my career because I got an exposure to different things and I learned to experience different activities that eventually helped me in my career and in my professional life.
There's a friend of mine, and he has this comment about a no is always just a yes with conditions. So it's really a yes, right? Which I think is a really interesting kind of point of view, which is true. But in your case too, you're always doing stretch goals. In other words, even though it's not in your comfort zone, you'll take it on because you'll stretch, right?
Yes,
You'll gain
exactly.
skills. And that's a trait for success and innovation. So, in fact, that's a lesson to the audience because I do have students in the audience or people who are early in their careers, and that is saying yes, right? Looking at the opportunities and seeing what happens. Okay, so you're saying you have this amazing capacity for mathematics and logic. Then the thing about mathematics and physics is quite sparse, right? There's not a lot of memorization required because you can do a lot of derivations, right, from just sort of basic principles. So and so you have this inclination, and then you study computer science in university. So what got you attracted to computer science and not mathematics or physics? Because it was more practical, perhaps, or
When I was going to college, computer science was new, and I knew that I was so my choices were like what I thought I would do would be either I would become a math professor or I would go into some kind of stats. And computer science is about logic, building a logic. So to me, it was similar, and computer science was much newer. So I knew that there were opportunities in computer science would be a lot more than just doing math and stat and being a professor. So my inclination went to I probably could do a lot more in computer science with math than I could do as a professor in math. So that was an inclination to say, I want to explore, because if I become a professor, I will probably do the same thing over and over again and won't get a chance to play with math the way I want to play with math. So that was my kind of inclination going into computer science. And I'm so glad I did, because in data science and machine learning models, it's all about really learning about statistics, how do you look at the data and how do you build algorithms. So I think my interests kind of led me in life to what I was good at anyway. And I think that's so beautiful about life, is it brings you back to what your strength is. When you're younger, you're hunting. And once you start learning what you enjoy the most, and that's why I love, the three things which you should always remember, right? What are you really good at? What you can make money, and what the world is, getting served by. So if you really focus on what you're really good at, and can you make money out of it, and the world needs that, then you are in a happy place. Then you are at a place where you can be successful.
so you graduate with your degree in computer science from Bangalore University, and then later on you end up with master's in data science from Southern Methodist University. What was your first job? And was it entrepreneurial, or can you sort of go through, say, your job arc?
So, and I'll add actually a personal touch here when I talk about my first job. Actually, right out of high school, I got married. Very unusual. And I had a kid right away. So I was a teenage mom, and I was going to college when I had a kid. In fact, the funny part is that I delivered my son in the evening, and the next day in the afternoon, I had my exam, and I showed up at the exam, and like everybody was very confused. Like, you just delivered a day before, how come you're here? So I finished my college, and a huge part, and I talk about this as a woman, a lot of people think if you are progressing in your career, you might not be able to have it all. And I always say that it's really about having the support system in life. It's so important to do the right things and find the right people around you. It's not only in business, but also personal life. They say marry the right person, find the right friends. I know this woman who had 4 kids, but she had a support system in her neighborhood where parents were supporting each other. So I think support system is so important. So early on in my career, I actually was married and I had a kid before I started my job. And my parents were there. And, it was a beautiful thing to be Indian at that time, because I had a whole clan taking care of my one kid. It's my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, and my first job when I came to US, actually I was born in New York, so I was an American citizen. And right after college, I came back, and my husband was a pilot. So we came back in New York, and my very first job was a computer programmer. I thought I would take a traditional path. I enjoyed doing math. And right after college, I took up a job as a programmer. And I worked for a consulting firm for about 3 years, 2.5 years, 3 years. And my client was Merrill Lynch. And so I was working there. Very quickly, my boss comes to me and says to me, Asha, you should, I was starting my career in 93, 94, when the market was really, really hot for technology. And there was a lot of need for programmers. And in Merrill Lynch, I started as a programmer, but very quickly my manager said, you need to step up, be the project manager. You need to get requirements. And in consulting, if you are from consulting background, the next step was engagement manager. So the engagement manager really gets involved with the client, and which was Merrill Lynch at that time, and takes the requirements for the projects. Within 2 years, my team grew from 2 people to 80 people. And I learned to do P&L, of that account. And so I was managing the budget for the project, the timeline for the project, the resources for the project. So I learned to run a mini business in a very early age. And by 24, 25, I was, ready to start my own business. Now, I didn't know that. And I think there's a big lesson here, because I was working as an employee. My boss came, I was pregnant with my second child. And my boss came to me and said, Asha, you're pregnant, so we can't let you go, but our company is getting acquired and you have a big bonus coming up. And you're on the list to be laid off. But we can't let you go right now. But when you come back after maternity leave, you are on the list. And I was like confused, like, why are you telling me now? Because I thought he would tell me, later when I'm back. But he said, no, you are such a great employee. You've worked so hard for the company. I want to do right by you. And he said, even though you are on the list, I can't save you. I want to give you back your non-compete. You've done such a good job for the client. If we don't do it right, the client will know that we haven't done right by you. And we want to hold our client. So we'll give you a non-compete. You can take this piece of business or take new business with this client. You can continue working with the client because we know they like you so much. And he helped me start my first business.
Well,
And that's how I became an entrepreneur, because I had somebody in my career who pushed me or encouraged me to take the leap. And I always say that I personally didn't think I could do it. But at that time, I had somebody who believed in me. So I think hard work and good work never goes waste.
yeah. So that really acted as a kind of a mentor in a way, right? So, and saw the potential and said, you know what, Asha, I'm going to do right for you. And so plays this entrepreneur and sets the path for entrepreneurship. So now let's talk about the entrepreneurship path. How did that progress?
So I have to tell you that a lot of fear, right? There was a lot of fear because I was, I had a computer science degree. I had a good job. I could have gotten another job and made, could have done well. And I did. I was interviewing. I had options to go take another job. But what I did a calculated risk, what my boss said to me is, Asha, you're going to get your severance. You're going to get your health care for the next 6 months. Take a shot. You can always go back and get a job if this doesn't work out. And my son was born in October, and my company started in October. And so I always say I had twins. I gave birth to twins because my son and my company was born in the same month. And I still remember from I was at the maternity ward, and I called my client, Merrill Lynch at that time, and my project started in October. My first project as a business started in October. and I had a team starting there. And I was calling the client and I was saying, did my team show up? Is everything okay? And they were laughing. They're like, Asha, you just delivered, so relax. Everything is okay. And if it's not okay, it'll be fine. Come back and we can talk to you again. And so the very first contact that I got, there were quite a few important things which I had to learn. First, as an entrepreneur, you can start a business if you have a client. So your past work helps you get your first client. A lot of times I meet students and I meet new entrepreneurs who have idea and they want to launch with an idea and they don't even know if they have a client or they're going to get a client or not, if anybody's going to buy that product or not. I started my company with a client, with a contract, and I also negotiated, which is, of course, with the help of my advisor, negotiated the contract in a way that Merrill Lynch had the terms of paying in 90 days. And I got paid in 2 weeks, actually, because I went through a prime vendor. I didn't have to go through. So the way I negotiated the contract, I could run my payroll without taking a loan or raising funds. So the very first year we made money and I was cash flow positive because I knew how to navigate the contracts and agreements and understood the financial impact on a business. And I could really, build a business and make a profitable business. And I have to say, it's, you could work hard, you could know your content really well, but the timing is not right. There's definitely a luck plays a role. I was in a really good time at that time that there was a lot of demand for what I was selling. And so that was the benefit of being at the right place at the right time, but also having the skills to execute. And I think all those pieces play a part. So being an entrepreneur, early days of entrepreneur, I think the few elements really played well to help me, be successful early on. And then, of course, Stephen, it's never a rosy path. As an entrepreneur, there's a lot of heartache, a lot of sleepless nights. But the good part was, at least as I think back, almost 28 years back when I started my entrepreneurial journey, I landed up having the right pieces in place in the beginning. And then, of course, as you go along, there's a lot of ups and downs. But the beginning, I had the right advisor and the right client to get me started.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. Like you said, a lot of entrepreneurs or who are interested in entrepreneurship have an idea and then they launch without even having any kind of product market fit or proper solution fit and just even knowing if it's going to work. Whereas you had a client and then you manage the cash flow. So as you mentioned, you didn't have to take a loan. So you'd be cash flow positive. So that's brilliance too, though. I mean, that's very astute to do that. And then you end up being also the CEO of a healthcare data analytics company. Can you talk about that? And then president and CEO of Future Technologies. Can you talk about some of these milestones in your life and maybe some of the stepping stones that led to being the CEO and president of these two companies?
So, yeah. So early on was great success. The 90s was a great time to be in technology. We all know that. And there was a lot of initiative. The Year 2K project was a big initiative at that time. Client server technology was coming in. .NET was a big thing. So there was a lot of new technology, great time for technologists. And so I grew my company very quickly. In the first 3 years, I was doubling my company. In the first 5 years, I almost doubled my company. By 99, I started my company in 96. By 99, I had almost 300 people working for me. And so it was just a huge, huge growth. And by the age of 30, I was very confused because I was growing so fast and I needed to understand. So I actually landed up, which I think was a great stepping stone. I landed up looking out I was hunting for people like me By 27, 28, I joined an organization called Women Presidents Organization. But what I realized that everybody was 20 years older than me and had smaller businesses than me. So it was very confusing that I was now in this world where I didn't know how to navigate. I was doing this for the first time, and I didn't know anybody who was doing the way I was doing it. Started the career so fast, had kids. I was 25. I had 2 kids, a business, a house, family to take care of. By 29, I now had 300 employees. My kids are going to middle school, so it was very confusing because I felt that I didn't fit anywhere. And then I started hunting. I said, if there's a women presidents organization, there must be a young presidents organization. And so I started Googling and I said, presidents organization, and then I said, young presidents organization. And I found YPO. I didn't know that existed. At 27, I interviewed with New Jersey chapter, and they said, you're still very young. You should try Young Entrepreneur Organization. And I did. At that time, I joined YEO. And then when the New York chapter started of YPO, I was 32, and they reached back out to me, and I joined YPO when I was 32. But what the lesson learned there was that I was so lonely and I didn't know how to navigate my business. Finding places where you can learn. And I found a place where I found people who were like me, were going through problems like me. And the problem was the first few years were great. First 3 to 5 years were excellent because we were growing, scaling. But what I didn't remember or understand was the fundamentals of running a business is operations, having a strong management team, having your systems and operations in order, to understand your finance so well that you know where the money is coming in and where it's going. In theory, it sounds very easy that, of course, you should know all that. But when you're actually doing it, you get so trapped in either sales or customer acquisition, or you start focusing on operation that you forget about the sales, or you start focusing on finance and you say you're getting trapped and you're not really understanding, because are we doing accrual? Are we doing cash? In accrual, things look good. Why cash is not looking good? Or cash looks good. Why accrual is not? So there's so much complexity in running a business that, to me, becoming an entrepreneur at such a young age, I had to learn all that on the job. I didn't go to school to be a business person. There was no entrepreneurial MBAs at that time. And so I was learning all that on the job. And so I started doing a lot of mistakes. So and I'm going to talk about the downturn, because I think somebody said to me yesterday, I was at the last week I was at a YPO trip to Alaska, and the spouse came to me and said, you're so inspirational, my God, you have such a great career. And I said to her, all you see is the iceberg, the top of the iceberg. You don't see what's down below. And I said, we all are successful in our own terms, right? Everybody's successful. It's how you define success. And I said, there's a lot of struggles an entrepreneur that goes through. And so, there's another really great video where they show entrepreneur driving a really nice car, living in a big house. But you don't realize how many times the entrepreneur knocked on a door, got nose, and still had to get up, right, and smile. The reason I'm telling you that story is because when first crash came, when we had and after 9/11, I had so many clients who didn't pay and defaulted on the payment. And then you learn about how important finances are and how important contracts are. I don't think I have gone to court so many. I became an expert at that point because people were filing bankruptcy. And how do you collect? So you had to go to court to figure out all that out. And then you sue them and to try to figure out, are you going to get the money from them or not? Or which line are you if somebody filed bankruptcy, and how much will you really get? So you get a crash course on legal aspects of the business, which I never thought I would get. So you now suddenly start learning about the courthouses and the lawyers and how you navigate the legal system as a business owner. And then, oh my God, I have to protect myself now. I have to build a trust and protect, put my asset in the trust so that I'm not getting hurt. So all that learning quickly happened in the downfall. I had to let go of close to 120 people in less than 6 months. And it was really hard, Stephen, because I was still young. I was still in my early 30s, and I was letting go people who were in their 50s. And these are the people who are, they were sending their kids to college. I still remember an older man sitting across my table and had a tear rolling down his cheek. And here I'm talking about being compassionate. I had no idea how to deal with it. Then I recently met a woman who's so angry at me. And I said to her, why are you angry? And so she said, my husband worked for you. I had 350 people working for me, Stephen. I don't remember that man. And she was mad at me because he was let go during the downfall. And I said, I apologize profoundly, but I don't even know. It was my manager who let go of this team. And it's like, so you have to be as a leader, you become responsible for not just your employees, but their families and their kids. So as a leader, you're impacting the whole community. And when you start learning that you're responsible now, we are not just working for ourselves. It's not about me anymore. It's not about us anymore. It's about the community we are impacting. And then you start thinking about, oh my God, what I do is important, and how I talk is important, how I show up is important, and what I leave behind is important. And I tell you, the whole passion for having an impact became critical to me, that it's not about me anymore. It's about the world and what, we leave behind. I'll be gone, but what we leave behind and the memories or the impact we have on people is so critical. And it's when you're early on in your career, you don't think about those things. But I think at that moment, I realized that I was impacting not just this person who was in front of me, but so many more people, And so I think that those were the defining moments in my career where I had to say, I had to step up. I don't have a choice but to step up and be responsible. I have so many stories, Stephen. I can go on for hours. And then I built another business. Then I built another business. Then I wrote a few books. Then I started teaching in college. There's so many defining moments in my career. I feel like I've lived a life of 100-year-old person.
Yeah.
And I still keep going. It's like the life is not ended and there's so much more to do.
So you learned so much from this first business, right? And you went through that post 2000 kind of drop, right? Excuse me. And you had to navigate that. And through that navigation, you learned a lot. But you also learned a lot by a peer-to-peer group called the Young Presidents Organization, or YPO. I didn't realize you were a member from that long ago. So you've been a member for a while. So you really understand the organization and the peer-to-peer learning and sharing that occurs in that organization. And that was a key part of your journey to ensure that you get insights and how to run a business with people who are in the same kind of position you're in. So you end up continuing with that, but also launching other businesses like this healthcare data analytics company and this future technologies company, and providing solutions to Fortune 1000 companies. And you got recognized by the World Economic Forum as a global growth company for 2007. So you see this sort of progressive journey of companies because of the experience that you gained from doing this work. And then, as you mentioned, you're a professor at Columbia University and you're teaching graduate classes of entrepreneurs. So how did you get into this teaching part of your life? Was it they reached out to you, or you reached out to them, or some kind of confluence that occurred?
Yeah. So I want to comment on YPO, and then I'll get back to the university piece. I just want to talk about the YPO piece because I think the listeners who are, in the progression of their career, so important to come out of your circle. Like, you're an entrepreneur, you're in your circle, you're the king of your castle, you're running your business, and then you realize that you make mistakes, but there's no one to go to. Maybe you go to your board, you go to your advisors, but that's your world, right? So everybody's looking at you to perform at this, building this product, the company, but you don't get the exposure to the external world. I went to YPO and I realized, oh my God, everybody's the king of the castle. And then I go on the board of YPO. There's a chapter board, and then there's an international board and international network and the committees. And I go pretty early on. I became the board member for the networks committee, international network committee, and then you see you have to make decisions, and it has to be in a board. You have to collaborate, but remember, we don't collaborate. We are the bosses of our company, and our decision is the final decision. But that doesn't happen when you're on a board for another company or another organization. So that was a huge learning, to learn to work with A players and CEOs of different companies that can be bigger than you. They're growing faster than you. So that was really a great way to learn about the world. And also, I was doing business really primarily in North America, but then you get to meet people from Panama, from Lebanon, from India or Singapore or Philippines. So you get to meet a variety of CEOs from all around the world, which opens your eyes to really understand how the world really works. I'm in an international forum. My forum mates are from Ireland and Mexico and Qatar. And so I get to learn the politics and the way of working in different countries. I landed up launching the IT network. And, early days, we didn't have networks within. So I got to learn how to launch things in another organization with peers who were A players. So there's a lot of learning when you actually get out of your comfort zone. And as you see the theme, I try getting into places where I'm not comfortable and learn and try to grow from there. And there's a lot of learning that happens when you are in outside world from what you are comfortable with already. So I would say that that's another great learning for entrepreneurs, is that, start stepping out of your world to continue learning. And that leads me to, I didn't have to be a professor. I was an entrepreneur, and I was happy being an entrepreneur. What happened was that when success comes to you, you also financially start doing well. And when you start doing financially well, a lot of people start knocking on your door. So the early 30s, I landed up investing in restaurants in New York City. I actually invested in a movie. I invested in a lot of land deals and real estate investment. I also got invited to be an investor and advisor for a VC fund. In New York City, I was at this VC fund. I was an advisor. We would have advisor meetings. We would review our portfolio companies. And one of the meetings, I had these interns who were the MBAs from Columbia Business School. And one of them comes to me later on after the meeting and said, I love your insights and how you think about business. And you give, when we review the portfolio companies, we are doing a pitch competition at Columbia Business School, and would love to invite you as a guest judge for our pitch competition. And I said, sure. And so I say yes. And I go to Columbia Business School to be a judge for their competition. And I meet the entrepreneurial professor, Murray Lowe. And he introduced me to another professor, Cliff Shore. And so in Lang Center, which was they used to, and Murray Lowe is still at Columbia Business School, but Cliff Shore is now at Columbia School of Executive Education. And so I met these two professors, and I started, from one thing led to the other. I became guest speaker in their classes. That led to Murray Lowe being out for summer, and he said, Asha, you mentioned that you would like to teach. you can step in for my class if you want to teach this class. And I said, sure. So I ended up teaching that class. And then they launched an entrepreneur in residence program, and they picked me to be a entrepreneur in residence for Columbia Business School for almost 4 years. And during that time, and that's another really good lesson, because we were 10 entrepreneur in residence, and we used to get recorded. They would record us, and we would talk about, and I was the entrepreneur in residence for big data, and I would talk about big data, and they would record me. And I landed up telling the cameraman, I said, I'm in big data science. Do you have professors who are doing, research or writing about analytics and entrepreneurship? I would love to meet them. And he said, oh, let me walk you up. And he walks me up to 4th floor, and he walks me, and I'm walking in. That professor is sitting with the chair of the department, and I walk in, and he says, oh, she's the entrepreneur in residence for big data. And the chair says to me, oh my God, so glad you walked in. We have a class starting called Immersion, Big Data, and we were looking for a practitioner who can teach this class with the chair, with him. And I said, I'm happy to explore. Of course, I say yes again, and I end up teaching that class. And that led me to, actually, I was, adjunct professor at that time by teaching that class. And then I started teaching entrepreneurship classes, and then Mailman School of Public Health found out, and they recruited me to be a part-time professor. So I'm on the payroll now and teach at Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University, entrepreneurship. And next semester I'll be teaching AI. And so that's my journey of being a professor. Just saying, being at the right place, asking the questions, because I don't think anybody else asked a question from the cameraman. Everybody got the same opportunity, to be recorded by that cameraman. And I landed just being curious and asking questions and walking in and saying yes again. That led me to being the, professor at Columbia University for now 15 years.
So just a little bit to unpack, and we're running sort of to the final minutes in terms of time. So, but earlier you mentioned a network within YPL. So if you can define the network, and you mentioned the word forum. So people outside of YPO, they think of a forum as some kind of like mini conference or a summit, but YPO has a different definition. So can you kind of define what a network is and then what a forum is?
Oh, absolutely. So just a great question, because we assume that everybody knows that in YPO, which is an organization of CEOs, of 35,000 CEOs around the globe at a certain revenue number, within YPO, there are chapters which is based on the foundation of forums, and then there are networks. There's 2 different entities, chapters and networks. Network is based upon your skill, your technology, what business you do. So if you're in real estate, you can join a real estate network. If you're in technology, join a technology network. So the 35,000 CEOs have an option to join a network based upon their skills or their interest. Whereas the chapters run on the basis of a forum where it's a small peer-to-peer group that meets every month to share experiences or learning with each other. So it will be about 8 to 10 people who meet every month to discuss their challenges, updates, and this becomes your own personal board of advisors. So when I talk about forum, that's my board of advisor. These are 8 to 10 people who I depend upon. They're my community. And then the network is a bigger community of, thousands of people. It could be 2,000 people, 3,000 people, which are similar interests of skills. So they're from the similar kind of businesses. So you can go into that group and then still create another cohort of 8 to 10 people or join a network forum to learn from each other. So that's the difference between forum and network.
Because you're meeting so frequently with your forum mates and also within the networks and so on, then confidentiality and privacy must be foremost, right?
Oh, that's the number one thing. We start every meeting by reminding confidentiality. So anything that is shared in the forum never gets repeated. In fact, if you and I were in the forum and with the third person or the fourth person, if the third person tells me that they have a headache, I can't come to you and say, oh, he or she is feeling sick, because everything is shared in the forum is confidential, which is a safe place. And that's where you can open your heart and show your weaknesses. And you know that you are here in a good environment to be able to find that support. And that's what I spoke earlier on. Finding support is so critical to have it all, right? If you don't have the support system, life becomes difficult.
And then, as you mentioned, you got this opportunity because you're so successful, because you're investing, and it's you're teaching graduate classes on entrepreneurship. You're part of the payroll now in terms of Columbia University. You were entrepreneur in residence, so that's an interesting kind of you're like a mentor in essence, a successful mentor who can then help others who are on that journey. You're also a partner in a CEO coaching company, right, as well, management services company focused on building turnaround and some successful businesses, but there's this kind of entrepreneurship kind of expertise part. I want to now segue into your book, as we're running sort of short of time now. How did you start getting into writing books?
Yeah. So during pandemic, I had thought about writing a book forever. Like, I think we all think about writing books. And being a professor, I had a lot of content, and I've been writing articles forever. So during pandemic, I said, this is a great time. I'm home. I'm going to now finish my book. At Columbia University had a press, and the editor said to me, if you write a book on big data or anything around big data, we would be very interested. So, my whole thing was that I built a machine learning company. My healthcare company was all about analytics. And I said, we're really moving with all this data, we're moving towards AI. So I called my book The AI Factor in 2021, when right in the middle of the pandemic, when I was writing the book. And when I was talking to the publisher, I said, I want to really name it The AI Factor, because it's this factor that will help you succeed in business. Understanding this AI factor would help you succeed in business. And I wrote, and my whole thought was, I'm being a professor now for 15 years, my whole thought was, how do I take what I did for work as an entrepreneur and package it and teach it in a way that business and technologists can learn how to use this data and machine learning models and use AI to be successful? How do they use this artificial intelligence to be successful in their business? And how do they apply that? And my thought was to make it simplify it in a way and create 4-step process that it's easy to follow for businesses. But a lot of time in my career, what I realized, that technologists, engineers think a certain way. They're really fascinated by creating complex algorithms. They're not trying to simplify it. They're trying to work with the complex systems. Whereas business leaders are saying, how am I going to make money? How am I going to sell this product easily? Don't make it complicated for me. So a lot of times, as an engineer, as a business owner in technology, what I learned is that we were building these CRMs or customer relationship management softwares or ERPs or any kind of application. A lot of times, these application engineers built were getting shelved because it was not easy to understand or use. And my whole thought was that we are having this amazing technology. We are collecting so much data. We are going to need to use this data effectively to be able to make impact and make our businesses easier. And being a CEO coach, I work with CEOs, and my whole goal was, we have to exit in 3 years. How are we going to make sure that we get the maximum return for our investors, or we make our EBITDA stronger? The only way we can do it is we can automate things. We can make sure that technology can help us succeed. So in the book, I started writing all that, and I finished my book in 2022. I started writing around 2020 and finished it. It took me about 2 years. And my publisher said, we can't publish it until February 2023 because of the shortage of printing press, during the COVID. And it was going to publish in October 22, but published in February 23. ChatGPT came out in November 22, and my book came out in February 23. So it's been on the bestseller list for 42 weeks. And then people started saying, you want to apply it? Do you have a workbook? Do you have a playbook? So I ended up writing my workbook and playbook, which came out July this month on 9th in Amazon. So both books are available on the Amazon now. And the first book gives you the theory, the use cases, and the 4-step process. And the workbook actually tells you how to apply AI in your business. So you can actually fill out the forms, and there's assessments, and you can really follow the playbook to actually implement it. And I've been now getting hired to do the workshops. And I'm doing a workshop October 17th in Phoenix, which is all about the AI factor. How can you build a strategy for your company instead of just randomly picking tools? How do you implement an AI strategy, a robust AI strategy for any business, small, mid, or large businesses?
Can you just briefly outline the 4 steps?
Absolutely. So I say that you need to start by assessing your business. So I talk about the power quadrant. There are 4 power quadrants I talk about. Really understanding which quadrant do you fall under? Are you really trying to use AI to optimize your business? Or you're trying to extend your business? Or you're trying to innovate your business and build new and launch new products? Or you're changing the game. You're trying to reinvent and build a multiplier. So once you understand which quadrant you are in, then you can apply and understand what data I need to collect. So the first step is to assess your business. Second step is data readiness. Now that you know which quadrant you fall in, you need to make sure that data, which is so critical to applying, any kind of models, is that how do you get data ready? And in data ready, there are 4 pillars. You want to make sure that you have the clear objective. You want to understand why you're using this. Can you create the value? And value is the really important piece, especially when you're building automation or you're using technology. Because you can spend the money, but if you're not getting the return, it's going to again get shelved. So it's objective, having the data management, the security, accuracy, integration, access to data. The third is making sure that you can build a culture around it. People are using it. People are integrating it. And the 4th pillar is about scaling it. Is it repeatable and scalable? So anything you build, any kind of process you build, you want to make sure it's repeatable and scalable. So the second step is data readiness. The third step is prioritizing. Make sure you're prioritizing applying the technology to your top 3 use cases. Quick wins, but give you the maximum value. So really understanding. So I go through the formula of how to prioritize your technology application. And last is measure. Make sure that you're measuring what you build to be able to create the flywheel. I call the AI flywheel. How do you create the artificial intelligence flywheel within your organization? And it's really easy to deploy once you understand in the book the AI factor, and then you use the workbook to start writing it down and applying it to your own business.
Every time I'm out doing keynotes, and I do this all the time, people are always looking for a practical guide. And you've got a practical guide, and you got a workbook as well. I mean, it's such a perfect fit. So that's why I wanted you to do a quick sort of summary of what's in your book so that people can go out and take a look and use it, right? And the workbook as well. We just have a few minutes left. I need you to talk about women leaders in data and AI, because I think it's amazing.
Oh my God, yes. Oh my God, that's such an important piece of what I'm doing. So when I was writing the book, I've been a woman, I've been a minority in any situation I go because I'm in tech field. And it never really bothered me. And it didn't bother me because I knew that, you work hard, you show up with content, you speak a little louder, you say yes multiple times. And yes, you're going to get knocked. Yes, people won't see you, but you keep trying and you succeed. But what I realized that AI exponentially enhances the biases. And there's no getting up and fixing it. You have to fix it from the start.
Yep.
And so what I realized that, and there are many examples, if you Google professional leaders, you'll see 98% of men show up. Whereas in real world, it's 30% women leaders. And so what it is doing is algorithms are enhancing the biases. So what I realized during my research, I found many, many stories like that bias can cause a lot of issues in the real world. And so what I realized that, oh my God, if as an engineer, I'm building the digital world, how do I build a fair digital world? I can't do it alone. And so the whole thought was, and I was talking to my son, and I was very disturbed. I was doing my research. I was writing this chapter, and I started talking to my son, who's older, and he said to me, "Mom, why don't you do something about it?" And I'm like, you know what? You think I'm a superhero, but I'm not. I can't do it. I'm just one person. How can I fix this? And he said, well, YPO is a great community. Talk to somebody and see what they say. And what I realized that when you have senior leaders come together, and I was coaching CEOs, I'm in the CEO group, I work with CIOs and CTOs. So what I did is called people in Fortune 500 companies, C-suite leaders, and I shared with them, I said, how about we create a circle and start sharing and building each other up so that we can build our companies. So Women Leaders in Data and AI was born in 2020 and formalized in 2021 to really create the movement. So what we do is we have corporate members like L'Oreal, Chevron, Dow Chemical, Google, many companies who are part of this, part of our organizations. We have corporate members who commit to bringing the change. How do we make sure we build a fair digital world with parity and equity? And that's our mission. And I'm so proud that we're doing this work because someone had to do it.
I mean, that's really amazing. So I encourage the audience actually to support this organization because you're the founder and CEO of Women Leaders in Data and AI. It's a global leadership organization bringing world leaders together, as you mentioned, for a fair digital world with parity and equity. So, and that's so important today. We only have about a minute left, so not too much. And it's the final question. What final recommendations or questions you want to leave the audience?
I would want the audience to do one thing they can, one thing they can to leave the world a better place. Wherever they show up, be a giver, not a taker. Because when you become a giver, you get so much back in return. So just think about one thing every day you can do to make the world a better place and be a giver. Show up to give something to somebody else without expecting anything in return.
Well, Asha, you definitely are exemplary model of a giver. And you do so much. And we were able to just touch a piece of it. And I'm so glad that we had this engagement today and you shared your insights. It's just wonderful. So thank you for coming in and sharing with my audience.
Thank you for having me, Stephen.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.